In just 48 hours during January 1944, American forces suffered 2,000 casualties attempting to cross a single river in Italy. A military disaster so controversial that a congressional investigation into it mysteriously disappeared from the historical record. The story of the Rapido River crossing reveals what happens when strategic ambition crushes tactical reality, when generals sacrifice soldiers for plans they know are doomed, and when the truth gets buried along with the dead. This is the story of the Texas 36th Division, sent to their deaths on orders from Lieutenant General Mark Clark. Winter 1944, Allied forces were stuck at Monte Cassino, unable to break through German defenses blocking the road to Rome. The Italian campaign had stalled at the winter line, and Allied commanders grew desperate for a breakthrough. Their answer was Operation Shingle, an amphibious landing at Anzio designed to outflank the Germans. 40,000 soldiers would land on January 22nd, catching the enemy by surprise and opening the road to Rome. But the Anzio landing needed a diversion, something to pull German attention and resources away from the beaches. The Rapido River crossing was conceived as that sacrifice. British X-Corps would cross the Garigliano River on January the 17th. Then the U.S. II Corps would attack across the Rapido River on January 20th. German forces would rush to counter these attacks, leaving Anzio vulnerable. Lieutenant General Mark Clark, commanding the U.S. Fifth Army, ordered the crossing with 2 regiments of the 36th Infantry Division. The operation prioritized strategic objectives over tactical realities on the ground. The soldiers who would execute this plan faced conditions that military planners either ignored or accepted as acceptable losses. But transforming strategic ambition into battlefield reality would require the Texas 36th Division to cross a killing ground that military planners had fatally underestimated. 2 generals, 2 very different perspectives on the same deadly operation. Lieutenant General Mark Clark commanded the U.S. Fifth Army. The Rapido crossing was his decision, driven by the strategic imperative to support the Anzio landing regardless of conditions at the Rapido. In his mind, the sacrifice of 1 division was acceptable if it contributed to breaking the stalemate and reaching Rome. Clark operated at the strategic level. He saw maps and arrows. He calculated divisions and objectives. The soldiers crossing the river were units on a map, not individual human beings he would watch die. Major General Fred Walker commanded the 36th Infantry Division that would execute the assault. Walker saw a different reality. He saw the river his men would have to cross. He saw the German positions overlooking every approach. He saw the inadequate equipment and the impossible conditions. Walker knew what the operation would cost. But Walker was a division commander, not an army commander. He received orders. He would execute them until he couldn't anymore. The planners believed 31,000 artillery shells would soften German defenses. On the evening of January 19th at 7:30 p.m., American guns opened fire. For hours, shells screamed across the river. 31,000 rounds pounded German positions through the night. The sound was deafening. The earth shook. The artillery barrage caused only negligible damage to German defenses. At 8 a.m. on January 20th, 1944, the Texas 36th Infantry Division began their assault. Soldiers carried rubber boats down to the water's edge. They climbed in. They started paddling toward the far shore. German machine guns opened fire immediately. Bullets tore through the rubber boats. Water rushed in through the holes. Boats capsized. dumping soldiers into the freezing river. Men drowned under the weight of their equipment. Those who made it across found themselves pinned down on the far bank, unable to advance, unable to retreat. Engineers tried to build bridges. German artillery found the range. Shells exploded among the bridge builders. Bridges collapsed into the water before troops could cross. Every attempt to span the river ended in twisted metal and dead engineers. Communication systems were destroyed. Radios went silent. Phone lines were cut. Command lost contact with the frontline units. Soldiers on the far bank had no way to call for help, no way to coordinate with anyone. They were alone in hell. Some soldiers did make it across, only to find themselves in an even worse nightmare. On January 21st, 2 battalions of the 141st Regiment crossed by 6:30 p.m. They broke through German barbed wire. They pushed forward 600 yards. That was as far as they got before intense fire stopped the advance completely. By late morning on January 21st, contact was completely lost with troops across the river. The men of the 141st Regiment were trapped. No supplies, no ammunition, no way to evacuate their wounded, no escape route. German forces surrounded them, cut them off, and methodically destroyed or captured them. Hundreds of American soldiers became prisoners of war. The 143rd Regiment managed to withdraw relatively intact, though even this success came at a terrible price. Men who survived watched their comrades die. They pulled back, knowing they were abandoning wounded soldiers who could not be evacuated. At 21:40 on January 22nd, Major General Fred Walker made a decision. He would not commit the division's last regiment, the 142nd Infantry, to this meat grinder. He formally ended the operation. He chose to disobey Clark, rather than feed more soldiers into the slaughter. The territorial gains were meaningless. 600 yards for 2,000 casualties. The diversionary objective failed. The Germans did not divert significant forces from Anzio. The breakthrough into the Liri Valley never happened. The operation achieved nothing except adding names to casualty lists. The soldiers of the Texas 36th Division went into the Rapido crossing as a cohesive fighting force. They emerged shattered. 2,000 men killed, wounded, missing, or captured in 48 hours. The 141st Regiment bore the brunt of the casualties. Hundreds were trapped across the river when communications collapsed and reinforcements could not reach them. They fought until their ammunition ran out. Then they surrendered or died. The 141st Regiment effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The 142nd Infantry Regiment was never committed to the assault. Walker's final decision preserved this regiment. These soldiers watched from the near bank as their fellow division members were destroyed. The uneven devastation created bitter divisions among survivors. Why did the 141st get sacrificed while the 142nd stayed safe? There were no good answers. Only arbitrary death. The Texas 36th Division had deployed to Italy as a National Guard unit with strong community ties. Soldiers came from the same towns. Their families knew each other. When casualty lists arrived in Texas, entire communities went into mourning. Some small towns lost multiple men in the same 48 hours. The disaster didn't just destroy a military unit, it devastated the home front. After 2,000 American casualties in 48 hours, Congress launched an investigation, and then the records vanished. This is not speculation or conspiracy theory. This is documented absence. A congressional investigation into the Rapido River crossing was reportedly conducted. But the findings and records of this investigation are mysteriously absent from available historical records. This absence is not a minor gap in documentation. Congressional investigations produce official reports. They generate testimony. They create paper trails. Copies get filed in multiple locations. Records get preserved in archives. The disappearance of an entire congressional investigation requires deliberate action, not mere negligence. Questions remain unanswered. Did the investigation conclude that Clark's orders were reckless? Did testimony reveal that commanders knew the operation was doomed before it began? Did survivors provide accounts so damning that the military could not allow them to become public? We do not know. We cannot know. The records that would answer these questions have disappeared. The cover-up might be more disturbing than the disaster itself. Military operations go wrong. Commanders make mistakes. Soldiers die. But when a democratic government investigates a catastrophic failure and then hides the results, it betrays the soldiers who died and the citizens who sent them to war. Without accountability, nothing prevents the same mistakes from being repeated. The Rapido River crossing stands as a case study in what happens when strategic imperatives override tactical common sense. The fundamental mistake was treating soldiers as expendable resources rather than human beings. Clark ordered the crossing because it fit his strategic plan, not because it had a reasonable chance of success. This calculation might make sense on a map in a headquarters. It is monstrous on the ground where soldiers die. The disaster illustrates what happens when commanders become disconnected from battlefield reality. Clark never saw the river his men would have to cross. He never witnessed the German defenses that would slaughter them. He never stood on the bank and watched rubber boats sink under machine gun fire. Distance breeds abstraction. Abstraction enables atrocity. The missing congressional investigation represents the final betrayal. Democracy requires that military leaders answer for their decisions, especially decisions that result in catastrophic casualties. When that accountability disappears, when investigations get buried and records vanish, the contract between soldiers and their government breaks down. Who decided the crossing was worth 2,000 casualties? Who approved the plan despite warnings about its feasibility? Who ordered the continuation of the assault after it clearly failed on the first day? Who made the investigation disappear? These questions matter, not just for historical accuracy, but for preventing future disasters. The soldiers who died at the Rapido deserve better than silence and vanished records. They deserve the truth. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.